So I suppose the first premise for us to establish is the fourfold beingness of things. When there's threefold beingness and sevenfold beingness and tenfold beingness and ninefold beingness, and there's just being, if you put them all together. But the four that I would like to focus in on is the primary sort of differentiation that Steiner brings, which is the physical expression of something, the life body, or as we often call it, the etheric body of something, then the soul body and the astral body, and then the ego or the self of something. So whatever we look at, one of my teachers, Friedrich Bernisch, he always asked us to do that. Whatever you look at, try and find the fourfold nature of something. So what would the fourfold nature of the chair be that you're sitting on? What's its physical body, what's its etheric body, what's its astral body, and what's its ego? Is there such a possibility for you to live into? I'll give you a nice example that I like to come to, which is, for example, it'll be relevant to this talk, is that of time. So when we look at time, we can find a fourfold nature of time. So we have the sort of physical body of time, which is our chronos, our chronology. And we could say that our current experience of time in its absolute physicality starts at midnight on the 1st of January and goes through to midnight on the 31st of December. And all sorts of things are laid out on that skeleton of the year. It's not necessarily the most living part of our experience of the year, but it's there. And then we have an etheric or a life experience of time, which would be watching something grow. If you want to actually understand something, watch it grow. So if you think you know something, especially say a child or another human being, how do you actually observe them over years and years and years and watch the change in the physicality and the change and the maturation and the flowering of something. So that's another experience of time. The third experience of time would be the soul experience. So for some people this is going to be a very long hour, and for others it'll be very quick. So we have different experiences of time. So, you know, when children say, "Oh, it's so boring," and it's just the hour seems like an eternity, or you're just so interested that what? Our time is up. You know, so we have it's the same chronos, it's the same etheric time, but it's got a totally different soul experience to it because of those soul qualities. And then there is the ego of time, or the self of time, which we could say is now, the moment. What can you? And of course, the other half, or the higher self of now, is eternity. Question mark. I'll leave that to you to debate in your minds whether that's true or not. But that's just an example of this fourfold nature, and we'll probably come back to some of that in the sense of the festivals as well. But I'd like to start, before we go there, after having just gone there, is to take a look at these renewal impulses that Steiner himself brought, the renewal of the festivals. And I think there's two major impulses of renewal that he worked with. And the one that, of course, we are interested in is here, how did Steiner actually address the Anthroposophical Society in its renewal capacity for attending to the festivals? And the other one, of course, is the liturgical year that he brought into a renewed form through the Christian community. So one of the things that he does in the Christian community is he brings very strong moon cycles into the cycle of the year. So instead of some festivals just being a moment, he actually extends them into a season, as in a period of time, with special prayers and colours at the altar. And he does that for several moments in the year. There's about 4 of them where he actually creates new ones and modifies older ones to fit in with a 28-day cycle. We'll see what that 28-day cycle means. Plus, he builds a complete liturgical year, which means that there are a number of aspects around a particular season. So, for example, he doesn't just do Christmas. He also has a preparatory season and a sort of a maturation of Christmas in Advent, Christmas, and Epiphany. Now, when he talks about Christmas in the Anthroposophical Society, it's often about Christmas and very often about New Year. He doesn't very often talk about Advent and Epiphany in the Anthroposophical Society as a how to celebrate festivals renewal form. The same goes for Easter. At Easter time, we have a preparation time in the liturgical year called Passiontide or Lent, and there are then the on-flowing festivals of Ascension and then the fulfillment of Whitsun. In the Anthroposophical Society, he focuses primarily on Easter, but in Easter he adds especially Ascension and Whitsun in the Anthroposophical Society, because the threefold experience of Christmas, Easter, and Whitsun are a very important renewal impulse in our relationship to the world. And then he also speaks about initially only Michaelmas. It's only later where he starts to build in the idea that we have a 4th time, which is at our time, at the June solstice of St. John's. So he really focuses, we could say, primarily on the 4 cardinal points of the year: Christmas, Easter, St. John's, and Michaelmas in the Anthroposophical Society. And that's where I want to go into with one level of this lecture, of the 4-fold being of the year. Is what do we have in those 4 moments as renewal impulses to do with that are not necessarily as extensively articulated as in, say, a religious or the Christian community context. We can talk about why that is, but just at this point, those are 2 sort of, I think they're slightly different. There's a slightly different emphasis in the 2 movements. So, and I'm not trying to make one better than the other. Don't get that. It's they have different purposes in doing that. But when we look at the 4-fold cycle of the year in the Anthroposophical Society, I did ask people if they wanted to. This is the sort of the core text for that: the 4 seasons and the archangels. There are 5 lectures, and the 5th lecture is very specific about how we can find a relationship to that from a Southern Hemisphere perspective, which I want to, of course, try and bring that. But in there, again, he does the 4 big festivals: Christmas, Easter, St. John's, and Michaelmas. And I don't even think he starts with Christmas, does he, in this one? He starts with Michaelmas. So he starts the first lecture with Michaelmas. There were Michaelmas lectures. So he goes Michaelmas, Christmas, Easter, St. John's and then sort of in the last lecture comes and then, well, how is this to be worked with when the archangels are inspiring the festivals in the Southern Hemisphere? And a lot can be read out of that, and I want to bring that this evening. So that's one 4-fold aspect of that renewal impulse. And the second impulse that I think Rudolf Steiner really asks us to look at, and I've written quite extensively about this in my book on the festivals, is he asks us to become very aware of our relationship to nature. But in the fact that since the beginning of the industrial age, in his terms, since the beginning of our cultural epoch, 1500, 1412, is a turning point. Copernicus is the turning point for Steiner, where since that time, since we've sort of come to a fruition of our intellect, we've lost the connection to nature. So if we turn to nature, of course we can experience extremely wonderful and powerful and illuminated experience of the divine. But in a way, they give us a revelation of where we've come from to this point. And he says, if we want to start approaching the future aspect of festivals, we need to find a relationship to nature where we imprint something into nature that wasn't there before. So, as I said in my little text, I think Steiner's renewal impulse is not a go back to nature impulse, it's a go forward to nature. To return to nature by going forward to it. That doesn't mean we deny what's there in nature, because it's extremely profound. It's the complete wisdom body that's there. It's the Sophianic being. It's all the wisdom and the hierarchies and the incredible wisdom of huge evolutionary cycles that have become manifest. And if we manage to touch into them, we touch into a lot of wisdom. But where is the future of the earth to come from? And I think this is where Steiner is really very important in the renewal impulse about the festivals. It's to come from what the human being can add to the other three layers of the earth. So again, the fourfold being of the earth. The stones provide the physical body, the mineral world provides the physical body. The plants provide the etheric body. When we look to the plants, so the plant life, these are all very important things for understanding how we approach nature in a forward nature. But the soul of the earth, where is the soul of the earth to come from? So there's a point quite close to the evening of the, I think it might even be the evening of the burning down of the Goetheanum, where he says that, you know, if we leave the earth to herself, she will die. Because she is physical body and etheric body. But the soul of the earth and the spirit of the earth must be still added to it. It's not completely born into the earth yet. So the soul, the third level of the soul body, and the fourth level of the spirit body of the earth still needs to be added to it. And this is where incredible collaboration comes about, because he says the soul body of the earth is to be added by the animals. So we have to have an incredible collaboration with the animals to add the soul of the earth in the working with the Christ and the Sophianic being. But the human being, by adding their free thoughts into those bodies, will birth the spirit of the earth and therefore help it to go across into its future gestures. So yes, Steiner's renewal impulse is quite anthropocentric. We are a very central and important facet of the earth. And you know, if we look at the sort of the eco-theologists, or the theologians who call themselves eco-theologians, they are reconstructing hierarchy. So in the same sense as Steiner, they say we have to stop, and we all know this, hopefully, in 2020 it's really being thrown in our face. We have to break down the hierarchies of power. We can no longer work with empires or top-down structures. We have to create a new social structure, and those will be hierarchies of consciousness. So depending, or concentric circles of consciousness. So it's basically saying that everything on the earth is in creation, and therefore is in the body of the spiritual world. But everything that is created is on a path of evolution of consciousness. So the earthworm is on a path of evolution of consciousness. It's just not the same consciousness as me, or you, hopefully. You know, that we have a role out of our consciousness. The earthworm has a consciousness to a particular task in the being of the earth. Without the earthworm, we could not be human beings. But without us, the earthworm can't be the earthworm. And there's a deep ecological and spiritual responsibility. And in that sense, the human being, in the the religious sense, but also in the spiritual sense, stands on the threshold to bridge earth and heaven, or spirit and matter. So the human being is created, this is a biblical term, Steiner also uses this, in the image of the divine. That means that we have the task in our consciousness to image the divine to creation. But we also are the imago mundi, which means we are the image of life. And we have the task to image creation to the spiritual world. Because the spiritual world doesn't know what it's like to live on earth. They've never lived here. We are a riddle, the riddle of the human being. And we have the task to teach the spiritual worlds out of our ego. And we have the task to teach creation where it has come from. So in Steiner's evolution of consciousness, we have become veiled. In our physical expression at the moment, a lot of creation has become veiled. The human being probably more so than any of the other beings on the earth. Plants and animals and stones probably still have more consciousness of the spiritual world than we do. But our task is to pick up out of our spiritual work a process by which we can open up our spiritual perception to these things. And I believe that the participation in the festivals, and especially in the cycle of the year, in its fourfold nature, is critical to this. In fact, so critical, you probably have heard this before, but Friedrich Rittelmeyer, who was one of the founding priests of the Christian community, asked Rudolf Steiner, because Steiner had been developing over quite a long time, he was developing the fact that Christianity, in its faculties of developing spiritual perception, was Pauline. So it's Paul who wrote some letters in the Gospel, was Pauline in nature. And that is different to how much of Western philosophy had been working and is working. Western philosophy and Western science and Western theology wants to prove everything out of documents. Look, Steiner said, I'm right. No experience. However, Paul never met the Christ. But he had an experience. He had prepared himself out of his Jewish background to experience the Son being, the Spirit Son, and he did. And out of that he could then say, therefore I know that everything that they are saying about Jesus is true, because I have experienced this. And Steiner says, Paul stands there as the emblem, as the person who really pushes us to say, added to our physical senses of the physical world, we can develop soul and spiritual faculties to perceive all these things. How do we do that is the question. And when Rittelmeyer asked Steiner, he said to him, how can a Damascus-like experience be prepared for the human being today? And he said, by living a meditative cycle of the year. So if we participate meditatively, we are building imaginations and concepts through which we then add something of the Spirit to the earth. So the earth becomes a place of revelation for us, but through our participation, we add something into nature itself. And the place, and this is another renewal impulse of Steiner that I think is quite critical, he says the place where these imaginations come from are from the human being. Now, that has changed. In the past, the renewal impulse, the celebration of the cycle of the year, took place by us turning to nature and discovering what it meant to be human. That was a particular part in the cycle of evolution, but things are reversed now. Since the industrial age, since the 1400s, the spiritual life of human beings, and especially since the beginning of the Michael Age, 1789, things are different. And we now need, he said, we can still turn to nature, and the example he brings, he says, in the past we would turn to the sun, and in studying the sun and its course through the year and all the various rhythms and its properties, we would find what the human heart was. and therefore we could find the medicines for making us whole, so to say, the pharma natura. However, now the human being, he says, that the place we need to do is reverse that. We need to go and study the human heart. And in studying the human heart, through participation in the cycle of the year, we give to the sun its full essence, and so forth and so on with the whole of creation through the cycle of the year. It's quite a big thing, because we can't just go to festivals to be nourished. I mean, we can, but then we're still just doing it in the old way. We're not using it as a mirror. We're not using it as a crucible of self-reflection to say, how do we, as myself, how do we, as the Anthroposophical Society, in this particular time of the year, create either, so at this point we probably have to still do it singly, but if we weren't in isolation times, how would we, at each of these four key points in the years, create something that through human interaction, through creating an idea and experience together, have a process by which we can feel we have added something to the becoming of creation, to the becoming of our solar system, towards transforming it substantially into its future expression. I mean, if we listen around, I've listened around a little bit, and one of the voices that I have found is, this is the end. COVID is the end. We're living in times where we don't know what's going to be here next year. That is bollocks. The sun will rise tomorrow, and we need to do something about it. Yes, things are all going to be different, but there are certainties. There are certainties that we can really invest in, but to bring about renewed life into that, we must add its meaning. I mean, that's, the search for meaning is really more than our search for happiness. So that's kind of a little bit of the introduction. I've probably already gone half an hour, of where the renewal impulse comes from. So these fourfold natures, I'd like to express a little bit. Let's start looking at my notes to see if I'm actually keeping up with what I wanted to say. So these fourfold gestures, another way of looking at this. Let's start looking at the cycle of the year. We've looked at the time factor of a year, the physical year. We get to another. What would the etheric year be? What would the astral year be, and what would the spiritual year be? So we've got a chronological year, 1st of January through to the 31st of December. How do we read the etheric year? And this is where the plant life, if the plants are the etheric body, then obviously how the plants work, and therefore summer and winter are quite important. Summer and winter are quite important to read where we are etherically, and partially where we are in the soul life of the year. So with summer, winter, autumn, don't forget those are very unique seasons to very small parts of the earth. We sort of talk about the 4 seasons, but there's very few places that actually have 4 classic seasons. Central Europe. The 4 seasons in North America are not the same as in Central Europe, and the 4 seasons in Japan are not the same as in Central Europe. And Steiner said that quite clearly. The 4 classic seasons are pretty much Central Europe, but if you go to South Africa or Chile, or try and experience, if you were posted in Antarctica or Karachi or Nairobi, you would have completely different seasons. We know all that. So the seasons aren't necessarily the cause of the spiritual year. They are the way we read the etheric life where we live. Very important, absolutely, but does not determine the spiritual content. We can celebrate that. We should definitely celebrate the etheric life of the year, and we do that by celebrating midwinters and midsummers and all those sorts of things. We need to do that to renew how we are as human beings in nature, and how to renew nature, absolutely. But then how do we read the soul of the year? This is where something slightly different comes in. I think I'd like to talk about the meteorological and the light year. So this may be something that you've already observed. If you haven't, it's quite interesting to see, we started, according to Social Worlds, winter on the 1st of June. And then 3 weeks later we were at midwinter. It's crossovers of experience. This is what I'm trying to point to, is that as we go across from the beginning of winter, it really only gets cold when it's almost spring. It's only now at the end of June start to get really cold. In June, July, August is cold, and then we're already in spring and it gets really cold first. So and the light changes. I don't know if you've observed that. I mean, it's really something quite important. One of the exercises Rudolf Steiner gives in the training of practical thinking is to go out every day at the same spot and observe the weather. And the next day to describe that weather to yourself and look at what's there today connected to what was yesterday over a year. And it's just magnificent to look at the change in the quality of light. Is it more silver? Is it more golden? The quality of the clouds, the quality of the rain. The meteorological light years really gives us a completely different experience to the plant world. And I tend to be lazy and just put them all together. It's winter, trees are dying, it's cold, and it gets dark early. Done. But it's far more nuanced than that. And to actually take up an active relationship to observing Mother Nature, Natura, and to actually see what's happening. And then what is the spiritual year? The spiritual year is what the human being has always overlaid upon nature. If you have any group of beings that you call cultured, they overlay something over the cycle of the year. No matter how far back you go, no matter how ancient, there is some form, even how secular they are. I mean, come on. The Australian Football League has its Holy Grail Cup on the Michaelmas weekend. Everyone fights for the cup all season. And on Michaelmas weekend, the Holy Grail is won by someone. It's an overlay. We have certain, we have Anzac Day, we have Settlers Day, we have all these different things. We have a secular year. We've got today, it's New Year's Eve for some, end of financial year. We've been out and had our retail therapy quickly this last month. Anyway, you know what I mean. Whatever secular or spiritual or ancient cultural life, we have markers on the chronological year to help us humanize ourselves, or at least to make life interesting. So this overlay is what I call the spiritual year. And it is important what we actually then do spiritually into the other things. And the big question would be is then how do we read Rudolf Steiner's renewal questions around the seasons? Because he often is very quite clear that, Christmas is in winter. And we forget to see that he says that in the other half of the year, the conditions are reversed or set towards us. Some people interpret that as saying we should do Christmas in winter at the other half of the year. I would say that in the southern hemisphere, and I'll build this up in a moment, hopefully, for you to ponder, is that the two halves of the globe in their variegated seasons are set towards each other and therefore create an organism. We are in a global, in the Anthropocene, we have to think of globally, we have to act globally, we have to create globally. If we find ourselves in a gesture where we are settling back into a smaller subset, check yourself. You know, if you feel that I'm just going to be in a smaller subset here. But yes, we have to work in a particular setting, but if we're starting to exclude other, we should maybe just check some of that. So, an annoying thing about the cycle of the years, it's not perfect. It's always annoying, because now it gets complicated. So far we've had the easy part. As soon as we start talking about the cycle of the year, it gets complicated. I'd like to tell you how I would like a perfect year. It would have 12 months of 28 days. And on the first day of each month, we would have new moon and the beginning of the next star sign. And that's it. But it doesn't work like that. Because firstly, the moon, we think the moon cycle is 28 days. But it's not. It is. It is and it's not. So it takes 28 days for the moon to go around the Earth. But from new moon to new moon, it takes 29 and a half days because the Earth has moved on. So the moon has to actually catch up a little bit every month, and it takes 29 and a half days and 28 days. So it takes 28 days to go around the Earth, so it's traversed the zodiac once in 28 days, but then it's got to catch up, and we've got 29 and a half days. Now, if we times 29 and a half days by 12, how many days does that make? I'll let you talk.
354.
350. 54. How many days are there in a year? So there's 11 to 12 days difference of 12 months that just don't fit into 4 weeks comfortably. Why? Why are the gods so cruel? Because it would be so nice if we could say, and there's an astronomy, it's called tropical astronomy, where you set on the 21st of March, 0 degrees Aries, and 30 degrees later you move on, and it's just set really nicely into 12 months. But that's not how it works either, because we know the sun has this precession, and when we say, today we are in Cancer, actually the sun's still in Gemini, physically. And we have to, in our head, become incredibly, I think it's done so that we don't become robotic. You know, I love this one. Do you know what perfect can do? There's only one thing perfect can do. Break down. A perfect machine always breaks down. Your car, your computer, your phone. It can't get more perfect than it is on its own, but it can break down, and it will. So perfect is boring. We are not on the process to perfection. Sorry, Annette. Yes, of course we are on to the process of refinement and ennoblement and embetterment. But are we really striving for perfection? Because once we're perfect, hopefully we know that there's yet some more development that can go on. There's no limit to what we can know. Rudolf Steiner says that the way to overcome the Kantian problem of our times, that we have a limit to our possibility of knowledge, is to be presumptuous. Presume that there's always something more to know than what you already do. And then you'll always be looking for more. No matter how much you know, you can presume that there's more to be known. And then there's no limit, is there? You immediately overcome the philosophical problem. As soon as I reach my ceiling, if I'm presumptuous that there's more, I'm already searching. So there's those sorts of things that we are looking at. So we have these 4 times of the year, which we call the equinoxes and the solstices. So this is the actual fourfold being that I want to look at, not just the physical, the etheric, the astral, and the spiritual, But these 4 quarters, and this is where this lecture cycle, we keep coming back to this in these lectures of mine. I said in my preparation, I'm probably going to be sounding a lot like I'm repeating things in each of these lectures, but hopefully we're coming at it a little bit differently each time. And one of the things that Rudolf Steiner speaks to us about is that at each of these 4 moments of the year, so the 2 equinoxes and the 2 solstices, we could say at the time where we're passing through the middle, and the time where we are at the extremes of the extension of the sun, earth and moon relationship, is where these 4 great festivals have been put, I would say, by all cultures in some form or other, according to their physical, etheric and astral years. They've known that they have to inscribe something in that, to partake as a human being, but also to listen to their humanity. These are the 2 sort of aspects, I think, that are part of our festivals. And so Steiner then actually talks to us about the renewal aspect of these 4, this is now for Anthroposophical Society, the four sort of quarters, and he talks about the 4 imaginations in these times, and how at these times, these particular times, the archangels work with the various levels of activity going on. The archangels mediate the energies from where the sun stands to the earth. The earth has a certain alchemical, etheric reaction going on in the stones and the plants. And into all of that, the human being holds a festival. And out of the human being holding a festival, let's say now in St. John's, if we were in, say, Central Europe, we would be in midsummer. And through the human being holding the St. John's festival in midsummer, in the heavens, a cosmic imagination arises. So an imagination, he describes those imaginations, describes 4 imaginations, and one for Christmas, one for Easter, one for St. John's, and one for Michaelmas. He doesn't do one for each month at this level. I mean, he's got the 12 moods, all those different things, but these cosmic imaginations come about through a collaboration between the beings of the zodiac, the beings of the sun, the archangels and the human beings, in relationship to the alchemy of what's happening on the earth, and through the human being adding a particular content, human beings in community, these cosmic imaginations emerge, so to say, and inspire humanity. And the Christ works with that in the breath of the earth. I'm not going to go into what they are, because it's more interesting for what I've been trying to look at now is how does that work in the southern hemisphere? And I've been pondering this for many years, and I've come to some slightly new insights to what I wrote in my book. So I'm going to have to write another volume to make a few adjustments, because it's not going to work as a second edition. But to put it simply, Rudolf Steiner talks about in the southern hemisphere, he creates this wonderful picture where we have the earth. Oh yeah, I wanted to say something about it, didn't I? That there is a difference between, so I'll just come back to that briefly, there's a difference between the 1229.5 days of 11 days or 12 days per year, which are called the Holy Nights. And that's the difference between a culture that bases its spiritual life on the sun year or the moon calendar. So there are cultures who have a moon year. Their year is 354 days long. They have 12 months of 29.5 days, and then they start their new year again. So eventually, the Islamic calendar and the Christian calendar will land up on the same year, because every year the Islamic calendar goes faster by 11 days each year. If we were Balinese Hindus, we would only have 264 days in our calendar. Isn't that fascinating? And we've got cultures around the world that are working on different calendars on the same chronological year. Imagine being in Bali. I think there are 13 calendars in Bali that they have to keep in mind every day. That's mind-boggling, but they do it. Wonderfully rich, wonderfully rich. So these 11 days are quite important for us in the celebration of the year because it's a bit of a time out of time. It's kind of like an archetype set aside in the sun year. But it doesn't coincide with the first of the month and the 28 days of my perfect year, because in the crossovers, in the rhythms, when the new moon and the full moon don't coincide, we have to, like the human body, we're not just automatons. We have moods, we have illnesses, we have to be a living being. And therefore the rhythms of the year also keep us really mobile in our spirituality. But we have this beautiful, these 4 starting points of the 2 equinoxes and the 2 solstices. And Rudolf Steiner talks about this, and he says, if we have, and this is a very simple picture, the Earth in the north and the south. This is so simplified, dear people. But he talks about how in one season, so he says that the archangel is connected to a season. So, for example, summer, which it is now in the northern hemisphere, Uriel is the archangel of summer, and the counterpoint of that is midwinter, which has the archangel Gabriel. So we would say that in the north, Uriel is at work in the summer, but down in the south, Gabriel is at work. I'm not going to do all 4 because it's winter. And he actually says how when, and he draws this wonderful picture, when summer is over in the north, Gabriel will descend slowly down to the south. Sorry, Uriel. And Gabriel will start to ascend to the north 6 months later. But the way that the archangels work in the south is different to how they work in the north. I keep coming back to this picture. We don't take this enough into account. In a very simple way, in that 5th lecture, every time he describes one of the archangels, he actually changes their gesture. So he says Raphael, for example, when Raphael, the spring archangel, is in the north, he has the Mercury stave, and it's like a fiery emblem in the sky. But when he's down in the south, he has the Mercury stave placed firmly upon the ground. Why? Why is that important if it's not important? I mean, why mention it if it's not important? But just even to look at that, and the way he describes that the work of the angel in the southern hemisphere, and I've become more and more aware of this. I've sort of ignored it because it's been too complicated over the years in a way to look at this. I spoke about these cosmic imaginations. There's the sun up in the sky. There's all sorts of vegetative stuff happening here, and the human beings are here dancing in the midsummer. And there's this wonderful cosmic imagination that appears here in the sky for us. I won't describe what it is, but there's this incredible, sorry, it's blue, so probably you can't see that, but there's this incredible interaction between everybody there. In the south, the working of the angels is different. And he says that in the south, the archangel, as they descend into the south, they meet the angel who was there before. So Gabriel has just met Michael, because Michael was the autumn, we're now in winter. And Michael has handed Gabriel a golden bucket, as they say in English. It's probably more like a golden vessel. I don't think Steiner says Eimer. He might, but I'd have to have a look. He may say bucket in German, but it's a vessel. And Gabriel has now received from Michael, who's been carrying for the last quarter of a year this bucket, this vessel, doing work into the human constitution. So while up in the north there are these wonderful cosmic imaginations coming down out of the cosmos from the archangels, down in the south, the archangel are using the southern cosmic energies to hold the southern hemisphere cosmic forces and put it into a particular place in our constitution. So in the southern hemisphere, the angels' work is to renew the human body to carry the consciousness that they bring from the northern hemisphere. And this is where it gets really complicated, because he says, and this is where I really want to try and build a picture tonight for us, is when the archangel has finished its work in the south, the energy that it has been built there, 6 months later, that archangel, so Christmas, 21st of December, when Gabriel is in the north, Gabriel will utilize the energy that was built now to work into Christmas. So there's a deep relationship from the renewal of the constitutional forces in the human being in the southern hemisphere for what appears out of the cosmos 6 months later. So my question is, what's happening down here? Because that's where we live. We live in relationship to the southern stars. If you go out on a new moon and you happen to be in a wonderful place where there's no city lights, you will see the signs of the zodiac, and mostly we see the southern hemisphere stars. We don't really get to see the northern hemisphere stars. In some places you can, but they're quite an angle, and so fairly distorted. We can see some of them. So for example, we see the Pleiades. That's just north of the zodiac. We don't really get to see the Great Bear. You can if you go, say, up to Darwin, because you're fairly, up there. You're almost on the equator up there. Orion's southern hemisphere, though. Orion is actually... He's exactly. Our stars, when we look north, all the pictures are upside down. So we've got to do a whole astral reversal of pictures in our mind, which is part of our living in the constitution. But this is my theory, is that, well, it's actually Steiner's theory, is that the two seasons together create the one being. There is a cosmic imagination, the north, coming down out of the spirit to fill our astral body, but at the same time an archangel is working with the human beings in the south here to renew the constitution. And now I'd like to just bring something of that for our time, because I could go I went through all of this in my mind again, and I thought, oh, this is going to be so exciting, but I can't do all four, because everyone will just go home going, sorry, that was too complicated. So I'm just going to give you an example of what I have started to see and understand. If I'm going to remove this, give another perspective to this. We're looking at 4 quarters. That means we're looking at a 3-month period. 21st of March, 21st of June, 21st of September, 21st of December, as the middle point of that quarter. So if we were pagan, winter started on the 1st of May, because that's 7 weeks before. If midwinter is the 21st of June, winter is from the 1st of May to the end of July, even though the cold year doesn't coincide with that. If you think that's strange, at what point in the morning are you awake after you've woken up? Well, you wake up in the morning and you're in bed and you're awake and you start to be able to move your legs, so your body and your etheric body's awake. But your mind's not awake yet. It takes quite some time for the astral body to, in fact, Rudolf Steiner said it takes mostly till about the mid-afternoon before everybody's astral body's actually in them fully. And with some people, it's just before they go back to sleep. Because it's a cyclical thing. It is a cyclical thing. But what I'm trying to say is the physical etheric awakeness is quicker than the astral, and sometimes the spiritual awakeness is a bit quicker too. It's not coincidental. Some people stimulate that. Yeah. Coffee, you know. Because we're not prepared to let the astral body lag behind, or to work hard enough to pull it in quicker. So we make it happen. No complaints, believe me. I do that. But what we're then looking at here is that that is the archetype that I'm working off, is that there are 4 quarters that start on the 1st of November, on the 1st of May, on the 1st of August, which one have I missed out? 1st of February. So the 21st is the middle point. So we are now looking at, I'm sorry to do this to you. We start on the May the 1st, and we go forwards to July. And the handover here is August the 1st. And I'm doing this because when we're looking at the stars, the sun is moving this way through the stars in the southern hemisphere. So I'm doing a backwards thing. So the 21st of June is our midpoint. And the 24th of June is St. John's, so it reflects the 24th of December as an axis in the world. So on the 1st of May, Gabriel received this golden bucket from Michael. And Steiner starts this process with Gabriel, and he says that Gabriel will take this bucket of energy and renew our metabolic system. So at this time of the year, our process in working with the global festivals is to be aware of the St. John's imagination that the Northern Hemisphere has establishing. And we are contributing out of the Southern Hemisphere energies the renewal of the metabolic system, which then becomes available for the cosmic imagination of Christmas 6 months later. Pretty complicated, sorry. However, what I've started to look for is what are the processes of the Southern Hemisphere stars for the renewal of the festival. Because in the Northern Hemisphere, the cosmic imaginations that arise through the human festivals, the Christian human festivals, are a reappearance of the old star mythologies. Simple example, in April, we have in the sun forces Perseus, the winged god who's flying across the water to free Andromeda from the whale. The cosmic imagination in the north, for Easter, Steiner says, is we need to imagine the Christ arising free of the weight of earth. A being who so it's like a transformation of the Perseus mystery. The Christ appears, or this being that is in the mythologies of the Northern Hemisphere stars. You can see that at Michaelmas, it's the battle of Michael with the dragon, and the Michaelmas imagination. At Christmas time, there is Cephas, Cassiopeia, and Andromeda, the birthing mysteries, the king, the queen, and the daughter. For the Christmas mysteries, for St. John's, there is a very complicated renewal thing, but it has to do with the great bear and the little bear and the bear keeper, Arcturus. So the bear keeper and the sort of mother, the father, in a sort of more cosmic aspect. So the old stars are renewed. The imaginations that have fed us of the past, a renewed imagination appears for us out of the festivals. So my question is, in the south, what are the stars and what are the gestures of this golden bucket? So around our time now, there are 4 steps that I've identified now over the years. I'll become more accurate with this. That there is a person. There is a type of person at the beginning of this process. They then enter into process with something. They enter into a process as step 2 with something. And then a new figure appears. A new figure appears at step 3. and an artifact. These are the stars. These are the 4 stars that happen in each quarter, that repeats itself. As we go through the 4 quarters in the southern hemisphere, there is a person. So right now, we see that there is a person that the sun is standing in, and this particular person at this time of the year is known as the painter. So there's a star constellation called the painter. So an artist. These 4 people are artists. At each quarter, there is an artist who stands at the place where Michael and Gabriel met. In the stars behind them, there is a painter. And in the process now, this painter will engage in our Gabrielic times in the southern hemisphere. And I can go through all 4 quarters with this, but this is different to what's going up in the northern hemisphere. There's a process going on. This painter engages with the great ship Argo, the Argonauts. So I don't know if you know who the Argonauts are. Jason and the Golden Fleece. So in this deepest point here, there are no stars. There is an etheric blackness in the southern. The southern pole is like an etheric, like the digestive system. It actually goes into an etheric openness. And so the painter, in connection with the great Jason and the Argonauts, looking for the Golden Fleece, and this is where now my imagination starts to kick in, is recreated in the form of an oracle, or a sibyl, or a muse. You can choose which one you prefer. Prophet. So there's a transformation of the human being as a painter into a new spiritual gesture in us, which I'm just going to put in here as an oracle, for want of a better word. An oracle or a muse. I could use some chalk for now. But right here, on this border here, the artifact that appears is the chalice. So, Michael, when he brought the golden bucket to Gabriel, had here, let me get this absolutely correct, otherwise I'm going to get completely. He had the alchemical oven. So we have the alchemical oven here, and what I'm trying to look for is, are these magical artifacts a transformation of the energy, or an expression of the energy that's gone through this process? So Gabriel over here receives the golden bucket in the imagination of an alchemical oven, works with it through this great digestive process of the ship of Argo and Jason and the search for the Golden Fleece. And out of that, the painter, the artist who's the painter within us, can learn to become prophetic and place the energy as a chalice, the new golden bucket, into the next process, which would be the musician. Chiron is the musician, who then, at the end of that, places the chalice on the altar. So we have the alchemical oven becoming the chalice. At the end of spring in the south, we have the altar. I can't show you all the processes here in between right now, but we have the altar. And then from the altar, Uriel, who comes in the summer, takes what's on the altar and creates the phoenix, the fourth magical artifact that kind of appears out of the 4 artists at the beginning of each. There's a transformation. Sorry, I'm trying to put this into words in a way, it's very difficult to follow this. But what I'm seeing is that there are these archangels, and they hand over this golden energy. But within it, there's an imagination. It's not just a bucket of energy. It's actually being worked on through a process of 3 months with human input. And the forces that are between the painters, so over here, we've got the painter. At the next one, we have the musician. The musician in us. There's also then the sculptor and the orator, so the person who uses speech. So painting, music, speaking, and sculpture as 4 great artistic beings within us that through the work of the Southern Hemisphere cosmic forces transform these beings within us through the 4 systems of the human being. So Gabriel works in the metabolic system. On the 1st of August, he will hand over this golden energy with an imagination of an artifact within it as a chalice to the springtime angel, Raphael, in the form of Chiron, the musician, who, in his conversation with the wolf, moves that energy from the metabolic system up into the breathing system and renews the breathing system. In summer, that moves up into the consciousness system, the sense perceptive system, and then the 4th one through Michael is the skeletal muscular system of movement. So we actually have 4 systems, 4-fold human being. We don't just have the metabolic rhythmic sense nerve system. We have 4 systems according to Steiner, including the muscular skeletal system. So we have the 4-fold human being renewed through this alchemical process of the Southern Hemisphere stars, where we can watch this golden energy being handed over to an archangel through the process of engagement with the stars and what we do out of a festival. It transforms the energy into a new magical artifact that can be raised into the next system of the human being. This is a critical part of the renewal of the festivals, which is it's really difficult because it's all in the human being. It's still occult. It's still mystery, and I'm trying to find ways of bringing these pictures. So I'm sorry that it's complicated, and every time I bring it, I'll try and create these pictures more clearly. I have written it down in a way that I understand it. Hopefully I'll be able to write it down in a way that you can understand it one day. But this is what I'm seeing, is that, the way the cosmic imaginations emerge in the north, come out of the cosmos, this comes out of the golden energy of the Southern Hemisphere, out of the constitution of the human being with work with the archangel. The 2 together, consciousness and constitution, create the full picture of the festival. I think I'm going to leave it there before I get more complicated. So just to recap, an angel at the beginning of each quarter hands over a golden bucket of energy that has within it a new imagination of a mystical artifact. The 4 artifacts are the alchemical oven, which then becomes the chalice, which then becomes the altar, which then becomes the phoenix, and then comes back to being the alchemical oven. So the alchemical oven is about the renewal, out of the renewal of the muscular skeletal system. This alchemical oven image is given to Gabriel, who can then take that golden energy into the metabolic system of the human being, and in the processes of working with the imaginations of Jason and the Argonauts and the Golden Fleece deep down in the Milky Way, we're out of the painter in us. So the person who's working with images, who is already creating imaginations, the prophet arises. So Steiner gives this wonderful lecture of the correlation of art and spiritual seeing. So we have forces that are used for art as the 1/2 of the spiritual seer behind it. There's other things that emerge with the other 4 processes, but I'm not going to go there right now. But at least now we could try to feel that through the way we go through winter, through the way we look at the images of winter, maybe we can try to understand that something of revelation can come to us. We have to access the painter within us to do that and bring it into relationship to these processes. That's kind of one of the simplest ways I can summarize it. I'm going to turn that